Morning people, welcome back to F Politics. Are farmers okay, or has Nigel Farage managed to brainwash them? I came down to the farmers' protest in London because I saw this on Sky News and it gave me hope about British farmers.
Because while inheritance tax is the flashpoint, we really are struggling across a whole range of issues. The cheap food subsidies we've had since the war that were preserved through the European Union's Common Agricultural Policy have been withdrawn.
But farmers in general are negative towards Brexit?
I would say so. If farmers back Nigel Farage, he will go to America, as he's already doing, and he will push for an American free trade agreement, which will return us to that situation. And that is not in farmers' interests. But the message here to the Labour Party is that if they do not back workers in the countryside, workers will inevitably turn to populist parties. This is something the Labour Party needs to get a hold of and needs to show leadership on, and then they will get farmers' support. Because we want what they need, which is a cheap food policy that supports us and provides cheap, affordable, nutritious food for workers in the cities.
See, Ollie Fletcher right there, that farmer, seems to have no time at all for Nigel Farage, which is the opposite of what we tend to hear, that all farmers voted for Brexit. But the best evidence that we have says that only 53% of farmers actually voted for it, which isn't that much different from the 52% of all voters. But Nigel Farage seems to be pretending to be the great spokesperson for British farmers, that he's the one protecting them from the inheritance tax that's being brought in by Labour. And so while I've been critical of farmers in the past for not coming out this strongly against Brexit, given that most farmers agree that Brexit is bad for British farming, and the leaders of the farming protests are now coming out firmly against both Brexit and Nigel Farage, the fight is now on as to whether or not farmers, the people who keep us all from starving, stay on the right side of history or side with Nigel Farage. And that's why as soon as I saw that, I jumped on my bike in Birmingham and headed down to London. A train may have been involved. Because I wanted to first of all find out how farmers were feeling about both Brexit and Nigel Farage, and for the ones who were backing Farage, see if I could convince them to move away from him without calling him racist. Because anybody still following Nigel Farage in 2025 will have heard him be called racist many, many times, and it hasn't made a difference. Now we can have a separate discussion about what it means if you can hear the screams of ethnic minority people for years and just ignore it, but when talking to those farmers, I prioritize strategy, i.e. what will actually work to get them to turn away from Nigel Farage. Now for starters, all the farmers that I spoke to who were actually willing to give an opinion were very clear that Brexit had been bad for their farms. And how does Brexit affect your farm?
Currently, we're seeing the ripple effect because the government are not delivering what was promised, and farms are constantly up against cheap importation of goods, poor trade deals, tariffs being imposed on us to export our goods, and I think it's only going to get worse.
And how has Brexit affected your farm?
Started off good.
Yeah.
Started off all right, and then the different trade agreements kind of put farming backwards. Sense of New Zealand lamb coming into the UK instead of Welsh.
Yeah.
You've got different trades with the US bringing GMO crops in, which are not standard approved to the UK, but they're bringing that wheat in to put in our own bread when that's not actually to the same standard as the wheat that we're growing. So
you're being undercut.
Yes, we are being undercut completely.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it would have been good if they did do it properly, but they didn't.
What I heard from farmers before Brexit happened was that you were promised that we'd essentially have high tariffs to the rest of the world, so everyone would buy British, and that would support British farmers, and you'd be supported.
But then there was the wrong agreements put in place with, especially New Zealand lamb coming in. Well, that's the other side of the world.
And that's
how's
why,
that for good for carbon footprint?
Yeah. According to Farmers Weekly, 69% of British farmers said that Brexit has damaged their farms.
Yes, essentially, yes, it has. And if you did the referendum again, we'd still be in the EU. But at the same time, when we were choosing to do Brexit, it was 51-49. At the end of the day, the country was completely split.
Yeah.
If we did it again, it would probably be nearer 75-25. You can't say that the whole of the farming industry chose Brexit, because we didn't. There was a lot of people that decided wanted to stay.
And that's one of my feelings, that there's been a disconnect of trust between farmers and a lot of the public, because there's been a perception that all of them voted for Brexit,
not
even
all
though
of
it was
them.
like 53%.
Yeah, 53%. 47 didn't.
I know.
So when you put it into perspective in that way,
especially young farmers, I imagine.
Well, I never got the vote.
Yeah.
I never got to vote for the referendum. We were what was the referendum in
2016.
2016. Well, I'd have been still in just year 8.
Jesus.
So yeah, I'm only 20 years old, and I got the vote 2 years ago.
How has Brexit affected your farm, for example?
Brexit has been an absolute disaster. So a very small farm in Leicestershire, about 120 acres, and we used to milk 100 cows. So we used to employ about 2.5 people and provide a lot of cheap, nutritious food for the people of Britain, which is something we believe very strongly in. But after we've left the European Union, the safeguards that were in place for British agriculture through the Common Agricultural Policy have been removed, and our government is now putting us through what they term the agricultural transition, which really seems like they're just ripping as much money out of us as they possibly can, and it's become unsustainable. 30% of farmers made no money in the last financial year. We just can't keep going like this, and I think Brexit is a large part of that, because the European Union preserved British agriculture against the wishes of our own government.
Now, as you'd expect, there was a bit more reluctance to condemn Brexit from the farmers who were fans of Nigel Farage, but they still got there. And how has Brexit affected your farm?
Brexit wouldn't have affected it.
What do you farm?
We're arable farmers.
Arable farmers. So wheat, grain, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, crops.
And does that mainly sold here, or is it sold abroad?
No, it's mainly sold in this country for milling wheat and chicken feed and that sort of thing. Yeah.
And the EU farm subsidies, are they more or less been replaced?
Nah, they tried to. They just haven't helped us out as much as they should do.
So the loss of the EU farm subsidies has affected your farm?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
I even caught up with Tory MP and former government minister Victoria Atkins. Given that 69% of British farmers say that Brexit has damaged their farms, why didn't the Conservative government replace the EU subsidies when they had the chance?
Well, first of all, I'm not familiar with those figures. What I do know is that my constituents in Lincolnshire voted overwhelmingly for us to leave the European Union, and as a Democrat, I believe that we should act on those instructions from the public country.
When I speak to farmers here, they say that when they voted for Brexit, 53% of them, they were told that it would mean we basically create a sort of fortress Britain whereby everybody would buy British and it would support British farming. And what they've seen is that we've had trade deals that have allowed them to be undercut by foreign produce, and they've seen trade barriers go up in terms of exporting their goods. So it's really decimated them. And so you say that you've come here because you care about the farmers, but what you've done, the biggest policy of the government that you were a part of, has hurt them. Do you feel like you owe them a degree of an apology for that?
Well, again, we believe in democracy. We put that referendum through, and the British public voted for it. And
a different type of Brexit, though.
But we acted on the referendum, and we had to do that.
You get what she said there? Like, she had no answer for the fact that the Brexit that they delivered looked nothing like the Brexit that they promised, but that they had to go through with it because that's democracy? Like, she's saying, I had no choice but to go through with the thing that I tricked you into voting for. That's their understanding of democracy. Now, I tried my best to empathise with the farmers who were being attracted towards the Reform Party and Nigel Farage. And I've seen people like Nigel Farage at these protests. Given that he's behind Brexit and 69% of British farmers say that Brexit has damaged their farms, how do you feel about him showing up here given what he's done?
He's giving the support to the farmers. Yeah. At the end of the day, he's supporting us. He's trying to help support our future.
He's fighting our corner.
And he's fighting our corners.
My worry is that given that Nigel Farage has a track record of hurting British farmers, like he did with fishermen. Like, remember what he did with fishermen? He said he was going to help them with Brexit, and they've been screwed by it. Yeah. Same with farmers. And so my worry is that farmers need role models, need leaders, need spokespeople that actually have your interests at heart. And often we're so desperate for decent leaders, we turn to people like Nigel Farage. And I'm worried that given what he's already done to fishermen, to farmers, it'll get even worse.
Yeah, I understand your worries, but I feel he's the best candidate we've got for the job at hand. No one else is stepping up to the plate, and you kind of got to back him at the end of the day. He's one fighting for us.
Given how you feel about that, how do you feel about having Nigel Farage as a spokesperson for this cause?
Nigel Farage is using it as a political agenda, so is Kimmy. They're all using it as a political agenda because it's a way of getting votes.
Now, the message I've been trying to get across to farmers as subtly as I possibly can to avoid offending anybody is that Nigel Farage is a racist with a proven track record of making farmers poorer. We know that. Farmers know that. We know that farmers know that. So if they allow him to be the face of their campaign, they are deliberately supporting somebody who they know to be a racist, even when they know that allowing him to gain power will make them poorer. And this was the closest I could get to an understanding of that reality. Nigel Farage has all the rhetoric and all the ideology behind Reform, UKIP, behind him as well. And I feel like farmers are being weakened, undermined by having somebody that divisive and somebody who has a history of supporting a Brexit which has damaged British farming, behind supposedly being the face of British farming right now. How do you feel? Would you like if it was somebody else? Would you prefer he stepped aside? Would you like more farmers to be the main spokespeople?
So you've got people like Clive Bailey, who is the Farming Forum chairman, who is a very good spokesperson for the farming community, and he's been running the Farming Forum since, well, before I was born. And I bet you've used the Farming Forum to search up different things on tractors. It's a very important software for farmers to get in touch and share their disapprovements, their wins, their losses. And if you want to do some bedtime reading, go on the Farming Forum. You can see all sorts of things.
So there are good farmers out there making the case.
There is very good farmers.
What we are seeing here is that farmers are finding a voice. They are coming to Westminster, and we are going to be speaking for ourselves. We've got a stage set up over there just behind us. That is going to be used by farmers to speak to farmers right opposite Downing Street. It's going to be really good, and we're no politicians because we're here to speak for ourselves.
That's very cool. I like that.
Nigel Farage is doing a good job of representing because it gets the media here. His political views will always damage anything. He's got good things and he's got bad things. It's like every government. But in the sense of, are they damaging it? I wouldn't say they're damaging it, but I'd say that they are using it for different agendas. Clarkson less, Nigel Farage definitely more.
Do you think Nigel Farage would be good for British farming?
As long as his actions speak louder than words.
My fear is that he's been making all this noise from the sidelines. He has objectively, according to the National Farmers Union, made life worse for British farmers. He plans to do deals with Donald Trump which will end up undercutting British farmers. And so I know there's the whole, at least he's not the ones we currently got, but there's a risk you jump into bed with a devil that is even worse.
The devil, yeah. Can it get any worse at the moment?
I think it can. I have no defence of Labour right now. I'm not a fan of Labour, I'm not a fan of the Tories.
Yeah.
But my fear is that going with Nigel Farage could make things even worse.
Well, it's got to be better than what's happening at the moment, hasn't it? We don't really want to be doing this. We don't want to be seen doing this. We don't want to upset the public.
Because here's the thing, farmers aren't stupid. The majority of them can see that Brexit has hurt this country and has hurt them. They don't want to follow Nigel Farage on the main. They're just desperate for actual decent leaders. So it's important to point out that Nigel Farage doesn't want the same things as the people he claims to represent. For example, Nigel Farage is out here saying we should scrap inheritance tax altogether, which right now only affects about 4% of the country, because it only applies to people who die with over £325,000 to their name.
Inheritance tax, when you think about it, it's on money that we paid tax on already. And let's just stand up and say no to death taxes, full stop. End death taxes.
So Nigel Farage is out here specifically to protect the rich. And so I put the question to one of the farmers. Would an answer be basically tailoring this inheritance tax so it only targets people that are not really using it for providing food?
Yeah, I think so.
And basically sparing working class farmers, people that are actually keeping the food,
exactly.
The country fed.
Yes, I think very few farmers would disagree with the principles of the inheritance tax. Land is exploited as an investment asset, and that is wrong, and it would help us if that was fixed. The difficulty is that it just doesn't do that, especially as very rich people put land in trusts or in limited companies. Those things don't die, they don't pay inheritance tax, so this only hits working farmers. And what we're just trying to say to the government is look again, right? We think you've got this slightly wrong. We agree with the aims of it, because I mean, who wouldn't agree with like taxing people who are exploiting loopholes? It's a loophole. Close the loophole. They've just got this wrong, and they need to look again.
So wouldn't it be better if, rather than having an inheritance tax that hit people that basically provide food for the country, you would just focus on the people that are just trying to avoid inheritance tax?
With national statistics, you know exactly who are farmers and who are not.
Yeah.
If they are not, if their job title doesn't have farmer in it or agricultural anything, tax them on the land. That's fine. Yeah. They can afford it. If they can afford to have land, they can afford to be taxed on it. But if you're using land as a tool to farm and a tool to make a livelihood for yourself
and provide food for the country.
Provide food for the country and support your family. Yeah, like all these tractors, you can say that they're all super expensive, but at the end of the day, they're a multifunctioning tool to work the land.
Without them, we can't do anything.
Well, without the tractor, you can't do anything. Who would you want your food from? People that care about farming, or people that want to make money off of it? Do you want it within the people, or do you want it in large corporations that are controlled by the government?
And that's the thing. You should make up your mind about whether or not you support taxing the inheritance of farmers based not on compassion for farmers, because if they wanted to, they could just sell the land and they'd be fine. The issue here is the food security of the UK. That's it. And when farmers started making that argument, I was in agreement with them. How would the inheritance tax on farmers affect food security in the UK?
So currently, farmers are allowed a relief called agriculture property relief and business property relief, which enables your agricultural assets, such as the land. If you were a supermarket, you wouldn't sell your supermarket floor.
Still belongs to Asda.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas a farm, you're asking us to sell our land to pay tax. Once we've lost our land, we can't farm, therefore the business folds. Also, business property relief has always protected things within the business, so your tractors, that's a business asset. They're now saying they're going to tax us on the value of our tractors upon death. So my children will not be able to continue farming if I die and they have to pay tax on the value of our tractors, the value of the grain in the shed, the value of the sheep on the land, the value of the cattle, and those values fluctuate day to day because the commodities go up and down all the time. How can you place a market value and tax that market value on a commodity that goes up and down all the time, and you would have to sell that 20% of that product in order to obtain the tax? How can you be a viable business and just keep slicing away at it every generation?
And so what happens if farmers have to end up keeping selling their land in order to keep paying off the tax?
They'll give up, and the country will rely on imports. And if we were to go to war, this country needs to be self-sufficient in its food security. And if we shut the borders, a bit like COVID, when the shelves went empty, the same thing will happen again. We need to be self-sufficient. We are an island nation, and if we are in this pre-war era they're talking about, we're going to be in serious trouble.
What would the inheritance tax mean for food security in the UK?
It will mean that our farmers will have to sell their land. They just physically won't be able to pay the taxes, and so farms will no longer be able to run.
And if the farmers sell the land, who would the land go to, and how would that affect food security?
The country will turn into a concrete city.
Because it's more likely to be paved over and then turn into other...
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and that means less food and less food security.
Yeah.
So it's not all about just avoiding tax. Farmers aren't all as right-wing as we're often led to believe. Hell, Ollie Fletcher that morning said...
So after the war, farmers as workers were empowered to own their land and provide cheap food for the workers in the cities. And that is the settlement that we're trying to preserve. But we're having to fight the party that implemented it to do so, which really is bizarre. Well, I'm hoping the Labour Party will listen to us, because I think that what we're fighting for is fundamentally the preservation of a socialist policy that was put in place by the Labour Party after the war. It's worker ownership of the means of production.
Ollie, stick with us, because I want you to get your reaction to this. I know this is not part of your organised protest, but let's listen to Nigel Farage, who's just taken...
On that clip, it didn't show the crowd, and I looked at the live stream on the way here, and there was about 5 people there, which I'm not exaggerating when I say.
So I am actually quite hopeful that farmers are going to be on the side of progress, but it's going to need Keir Starmer to actually do decent things. Otherwise, Nigel Farage is just going to clean house. I just hope that enough farmers see Nigel Farage for the con artist that he is and don't put somebody who crippled their industry into government. I'm Femi. Make sure you follow F Politics so politics doesn't F you. Have a great week.